evening. Welcome to the Books Panel. Today is Friday, May the 23rd, 2025. Thank you so much for checking us out here. We've got the panel assembled again here. For today, we will be, I'd like to first of all take this opportunity to welcome, thank you guys for hopping in tonight.
It's an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having us.
Oh, no problem, no problem. And I am here, and we've got Makara here as well. We as well as the rest of the panelists. So I want to start with. Let's kind of dissect our overall thoughts. Lynette, I'm going to start with you actually, because you were the one that suggested the book. So, what were your initial thoughts on the book?
I have to start off by saying that I'm not a Rush fan, and never have been. But there's such a unique story. There's not a lot of Canadian musicians that really make it in like the global market, and so that's why I wanted to read the book. I wanted to hear their story and figure out like how did they get from just being, like a small time band in Toronto, maybe playing in some bars or something like that to, like a global phenomena. Um, I thought it was very well done. It was interesting that he included some of his parents' history about, surviving the war and the concentration camps. And, I think overall it was a really candid book. He didn't shy away from, some topics. But there was also, you could tell he was being diplomatic because I got a feeling that they kind of had a falling out with Kiss at some point, and he kind of alluded to it, but like he didn't go into great detail. He didn't, badmouth anyone, just kind of said, well, this happened and that was the last time we opened for them kind of thing. So it was, I learned a lot about recording and I'm guessing that it's probably a lot different than it was back like 30 or 40 years ago, but just learning overall how that works when you go into a recording studio and the things that you do to record an album and the way it kind of all comes together was really interesting. So even though I'm not a Rush fan, I really enjoyed the book. I haven't read any of I know there's a couple of other members I think that wrote books as well. I haven't read those, but I probably will at some point just to kind of see things from their point of view.
Yeah, you know what I really kind of thought was very kind of interesting was that I thought it was very authentic in a lot of ways because of the deep stories he gets into. And as you just pointed out about his personal life, as well as when it came to his professional life.
Yeah, very much so. It was, it really made me feel like I was there. I was there during his childhood. I was there during the death of his father. I was there when he was like first starting to play guitar, and I was there when, he was like struggling and out of school and trying to figure out what he was going to do with his life. And, it wasn't just like just reading a bunch of chronological events. He did a great job of like telling the story and actually, making it feel like that you, the reader, were there with him.
Exactly. Jeff, what are your thoughts? Sorry, I saw you jump in there. Go ahead.
So, full disclosure, I still have a ways to go in this book. But I did want to.
No problem.
But I did want to build upon what you'd said, Ali, in that it's a very authentic book, as you said, but I think it's also, he's very earnest in the way that not only he reads the book, but just how he writes the book. At one point, he is, if we're going on his upbringing, we're bouncing between how he felt as a kid and, his parents' personal struggles and how they were getting on. So, you've got the kids at school, but then, while we're at school, here's my parents running their own business or working for someone else, and here's what they're struggling with, or here's what they see in their kids, sort of thing. And, you know, I get that, I read the book and I think that, it's a strange thing to think, but I don't think that, Geddy Lee from 40 years ago could have written a book this, this authentic, or even just this encompassing. I think he has become, increasingly more empathic, as he's gotten older and as he's seen more. And I don't know, there's just this duality of, very, we take ourselves very seriously, even like, they're not shy about how they view themselves as a band, especially how they view what they're not. But at the same time, there's always a lightheartedness in just some of the stuff that they do. Like, I don't know if you guys have ever seen the film that they put out where, it's a polka band leader and they end up going into the, this version of Spirit in the Radio with a bunch of accordions, and then there's the bandmaster that's scolding everybody, and I've kind of noticed that too with other groups like The Who or like a Zeppelin, where yes, it's very hard rock music, and especially when it first came out, it was a big shock to, the press, who was, was still living in 1950 in terms of what they preferred. But, you listen to it now, or even just, with just a pair of headphones where it's nothing but you and the tunes coming from left to right. And there's a sort of lightheartedness about it too, even though it's pumping, it's thrashing, it's electric, it's, fueling, but there's also again, there's just this jovialness about it too. And so I think it really kind of embodies, the Rush experience.
Yeah, I know that. I agree with you on that one. And let's go over to Lily next. What did you think of it?
I really enjoyed it. I think Lynette and Jeff made a lot of good points about Getty's writing style, how he was like in some ways he's very vulnerable in describing like his family's history and like his some of his emotions around his father's death, and then in some ways like you said, Lynette, like when they had their falling out with Kiss, he was able to have some discretion. He didn't like go too much into detail with that. And I really enjoyed it. I'm not a Rush fan at all either. So it was just interesting. I actually looked up the band after I haven't finished it, but as I was reading it, I looked up some of their songs and started to like appreciate their music a little bit more.
Yes. No, I can see that. You know what? One of my favorite. Well, you know what my favorite Rush song is Working Man. Call Me the
Nice.
Working Man is part of the chorus there.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
And then in some ways that's the one that really got them on the map because it endeared them
Yeah.
to everybody.
Well, I guess maybe I'm the working man. I guess.
There you go. There you go.
True.
I guess I'm the working man. I guess around here. Yeah, Makara, your thoughts so far?
Yeah, I would echo a lot of what Jeff and Lynette and Lily have said, because I noticed a lot of the same sorts of things with the writing and the storytelling and the stories that he chooses to tell, which I think are really interesting about his life, about his family's life.
Mm-hmm.
Even
Yep.
even just the idea of he could very easily stick to the big life events and like some of the events of that era, but he really chooses to put you in that era, in where they were living, in the things that were going on, and he really paints a picture very well. And I think something else that stood out to me was just kind of his sense of identity and how much of that was wrapped up in, he goes on this big discussion about names, his name, his family's names, and what
Hmm.
changes in that and in him when that's sort of the Yiddish and Polish names and things and the
Right,
anglicized
yeah.
names and what that sort of does to you, even when he had his middle name all wrong for so many years, right? And then he finds and what that sort of did to him, and like, wait, who am I?
And the fact that his mom just got mixed up. You
I
know,
know.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
just forgot.
I forgot.
yeah,
You was Lauren. You was Lee. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And he
My
just
mom was just like, I forgot.
yeah.
yeah.
And there's all these he balances humor and tragedy so beautifully at times. Like these are not small stories that he tells and small events, but just sort of the ways that he will even choose to narrate something just kind of bring it to life in a really lovely way, and I've enjoyed it very much so far.
Yeah. Now, have you got to the end yet, or?
Through, I'm kind of at the tail end of where his parents are. Don't you chuckle at me.
It's a 16-hour book. It's
Yeah,
I
thank
don't
you,
blame
Lily.
you.
And it's
I,
one of the
I
shorter ones
appreciate
we've
it.
got.
No, it's true.
Wow.
There, I did plow through 4 chapters. But I'm
All right, well,
reading the rest. But
Oh boy!
Sienna, what are your thoughts thus far?
I was.
we're not editing. We're so not editing this out.
No,
I,
no,
No, no,
I
no,
hope
it
no,
needs to
no.
be
well, we're
exactly
live right
like
now,
this.
so
Oh yeah, no. Full disclosure, this won't be edited. No.
Oh darn! I guess I better watch my language. Sorry.
Oh, you had
Take
to.
off.
Oh, Makara, you had to just sort of, you had to get me there, didn't you?
I did, because I could hear you starting to laugh as I described where I was at, and I kind of just had to nip that one in the bud.
No, that's okay.
As for your language, Jeff, watch your effing language.
Yeah.
Oh
There you
yeah.
go.
Don't you love how he would alternate sometimes by saying just effing, and there were times where he'd actually say the word, and
Yes.
in some cases,
That was
sentence after sentence.
interesting.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's interesting.
That
I guess
is it.
I guess that's part of the lexicon. Is that part of the Rush lexicon?
I would imagine, and I think really, Makara, you were absolutely right, and I was just about to mention that as well, where he really, like, the way he balances the humor and the, like, humor and tragedy, as you say. Like, he tells the story in a vulnerable way, but in a way that also encompasses humor and tragedy, which makes it all the more of a fun read.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm actually at the part where they get back from their trip to Poland and Germany, and it's one of those trips where it really, and as they paint, like, it really paints a picture, and as he describes it, as it happened, like as the events happened to his parents and how his parents met, it was like you really do feel like you're right there. You really do feel like you're right there, and it was just, I had goosebumps all throughout chapter 3, and I haven't made it to the end of the book yet, but definitely going to read some more tonight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So, if we're talking about how our progress throughout the book, I'm around the time of Farewell to Kings, but going back to that chapter, there's a couple of things. First off, he knows the type, he knows the different types of readers that might be buying his book, because at the beginning of the 3rd chapter, he goes, if you want to be spared these details and just go right to Russ, just go to the next chapter.
Oh yeah, that too. Yeah.
But one thing that struck me as well, a couple of things actually, now that I think about it, because one is the fact that he, as you go through the various stages of the war, at some point, these two, this couple, they tried to stick together as much as they could, and then when they were separated, come liberation, they are trying to find, they're still trying to find each other. And he says, like, even in the midst of a tragic war where everyone is just a wink away from from never coming back, there's a couple who's trying to romance each other at the time.
Mhm.
And following that, another thing that really struck me was, after the war, and once they returned back to Poland to try and put together their lives, or and see what was like what was there, and just try and gain some sort of normalcy after having been in the crosshairs for so long, that they were pretty much just everyone had just sort of turned the other way. The houses that they lived in were either occupied, even if their stuff was still belonged in it. And his folks vowed never to speak the language of Polish again. And then, even though they still did when they were trying, when they didn't want people to understand what they were saying, or when they were arguing in front of the kids and they knew that their kids spoke Yiddish. But then, like you'd said, when they returned to Poland and to Germany, and they're driving through Poland, and they get into a taxi, or they have a driver with them, and he couldn't speak very good English, and so they're trying to communicate with him, and all of a sudden, out of just instinct, his mom just spends the whole rest of the trip talking in Polish to him, because all of a sudden she's it's back in 1934, and she's just going through daily life, and it's wow. And you never lose that sense of 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 uh rising, I guess, because they're standing outside this one house, and she's like, "Be careful, get down, they might shoot again."
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm laughing at your interpretation, your imitation of that. No, you did a good job of that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I love how he does that in the book, the way he narrates, and the humor and the like, even just the way he narrates his um precision when it comes to pronunciation. It's really, and the accent, it just, wow, it really adds to the story. And you mentioned the narration, like, just as much in the actual reading of the book as in the writing is just phenomenal all the way around. And it just makes me want to read more.
He does talk about being a perfectionist in the book,
Mm.
and how sometimes during his musical career that's kind of come back to bite him. Now, I mean, luckily for him, the other band members, they knew what he was like, and they could work with that. But I suspect there are people that probably couldn't, because he just had to have things a certain way. And you can tell that just in the way he narrates the book too, right? Like, he's not going to settle for just reading it in like a monotone. It has to be a performance. He's still a performer, even though he's reading a book and he's not singing a song, but it's still a performance.
Yes, absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. That's what makes it really unique.
There are a couple of times where he'll let his singing voice go through, where he'll be like, we open the show, and the critics hear me open up with a yeah, or whatever, but you just hear, because there's a big difference between his speaking voice and his singing voice, because sometimes especially when you're younger, you kind of assume that people sound the way they sing, or they sing the way they sound. So if you spoke to Geddy Lee and he was talking to you in his singing voice, like in the when he did the song "Take Off," for the Bob and Doug McKenzie album,
Mm.
at the very end of where he's like, "Hey, you guys, take off," but and that's his singing register, but he's actually saying, he's not singing it, but he's speaking to you in that way.
Mhm.
And then cut to the end where he is left to his own, everyone's gone, and he's like, "Oh, take off," we're back to the speaking voice again. But it's the great thing about that, because going back to him being a perfectionist, it sounds like, all three members of the band were some flavor of neurotic because, he even says like, I was always the one who was who had everything messy in a nice kind of way, whereas, Neil and Alex where he's like, I'm not a big I'm not a big zodiac guy, but they were, true Virgos. They were, they were just had to have everything the exact same way. If you went through and, I don't know, moved an index card off the desk, it would throw off their whole day. It would just, they'd have to tear the whole room apart and put it back together again, sort of thing.
Yeah, and Lynette, I was kind of wanted to, like, what I found kind of interesting was kind of towards the end when he was talking about how like how everybody wants his autograph and things like that. I thought that was kind of like where, like, in places, like, I thought it was kind of like when he was mentioning that where the places people stop him to grab that to get an asking for an to get an autograph. I thought that was some of it was I thought it was very interesting, like in places that people would stop him and kind of ask him to do that, and if they could get one.
Yeah, I mean, he obviously has been famous for quite a while, but I think he's still humble, and I think
Yeah.
to some degree it still amazes him that, oh, I could be over in Japan and people are asking for my autograph, and wow, like it's not just in Canada, where definitely Russia's well known here, but it's all across the world, and I, you know now, obviously, I will say this: like he wrote his own story, and he narrated it. That's fine.
Yeah.
But if you're
Yeah.
gonna do that, there's gonna be some kind of bias, right? You are
Yes.
going to want to paint a certain kind of picture, but I don't feel like any of it um was really fabricated to any degree,
No.
I
Yeah.
don't think that it was really scary because he was honest about a lot of things that he didn't necessarily have to talk about.
Yeah. Exactly. Yep. Yeah, and
Yep.
I think too. It's he was like he was very, like, that was the thing I really appreciated, that he was very humble throughout the whole thing.
Yeah, very much so.
Absolutely. Yeah. Very humble and very vulnerable. And especially when it came to his parents' stories. And I mean, it must have been hard. And he mentions this in the book, like it must have been like he really puts himself in his parents' shoes and puts himself in his mom's shoes and acknowledges that even though um you know his mom did tell the kids the stories of the war and the Holocaust, and but he acknowledges that must have been really tough for her to live through all that. And yeah, like
Even
it's
his
just very humble in that way too. Go ahead, Lynette.
Sorry, I did not mean to cut you off. um Even his troubles with his wife, like he gets married, and of course, band life is, it's a lot of work, and I think a lot of famous people, whether they be actors or musicians or whatever, a lot of them are really married to their work, right? Like you don't get to be famous by just kind of cruising along and, oh, maybe I'll do a couple of hours of work today. Oh, I feel like taking tomorrow off. Like, you know what I mean? You have to be a really ambitious person and a really hard worker.
Yes.
And of course, there are lots of people who are ambitious and hardworking and who never reached that kind of status. So I think
Uh-huh.
that's, why a lot of their relationships fail is because, they're hardworking, they're not home enough. Maybe their partner feels neglected, and they don't maybe have the communication to skills to deal with that, or the drive, right? They're just like, well, okay, you know what, this we'll just end it. Like I'm better off on my own, kind of thing, you know.
Hmm.
But he
Yeah.
was really honest about like what he was doing in that relationship that put it in jeopardy.
And I think
And
the
I
other.
think, oh,
No,
sorry,
no, go
Allie,
ahead,
go
please.
ahead.
No, 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 go ahead. Go ahead.
And I think just from these early chapters, it sounds like because he mentions therapy and things a few times, so it sounds like he has really done that work. And just from how he is able to empathize and sort of the introspection that he does, as Jeff kind of said, like at this point in his life when he's writing this, like he is clearly someone who has been willing to do that work. And that, of course, can't be said for everyone who might be in that situation. Like anyone who might have been in that relationship sort of dilemma.
You know,
And
he
I.
even mentions during the war, he's like, our parents told us partially because they couldn't go to therapy at that time because for two reasons. Number one, if you went to a mental institution in the 1960s, you were likely going to stay there for a long, long time. And number two, their attitude was, why would I, pay for something that I can tell someone for free?
Yeah, and I
Hmm.
think something else I found really interesting about that stood out to me was that he said at some point later on it would have been considered irresponsible of his parents to have told the stories that they did. And I that stood out to me because I wondered why that would have been considered irresponsible of them to have told their kids. As much as it's horrific and it was this terrible thing that they lived through, I don't know what would have been irresponsible about.
One can only guess, but you could look at it from different sides. Like that in of itself wouldn't lead to any sort of anxious attachment, but it would it could lead to some sort of codependency. There are some situations where if a parent leans on their own children to be their emotional anchors and to air their grievances with them, now in effect the children have a sort of split responsibility with their parent, or sometimes, I mean, this is kind of an extreme case, but sometimes the roles are reversed. So
Hmm.
part of now that you mention it, I wonder if there's a therapeutic aspect in terms of parenting and in terms of just child connections that, and it's also part of it might just be something that's constantly debated. It's right. Whether or not you should tell you should tell um, hard truths to your children that young and how you should expose them, you know is alongside something else he mentions later on, which is when you grow up in an immigrant household, you have to eat the same you have to eat the same dinner that that's cooked for your father. But and that's only sort of in the recent past become something that separates the old school from the new school, regardless of what culture your family comes from. Like, I think a lot of us here,
Hmm.
if not all of us, just ate. It was one meal per. It was one meal per sitting. It wasn't what do the kids want to eat, what does the dad want to eat.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So one can only guess. I
Yeah.
don't claim to have the answer of why that would have been
Yeah.
frowned upon, but sorry, Alec.
I wouldn't claim to have the answer. Oh, sorry. Do you want to go ahead, Allie,
No,
or?
go ahead, please.
Yeah, I wouldn't claim to have the answer either, but I have been reading another memoir of a journalist who is the daughter of a Holocaust survivor, and she was really dealt with a lot of trauma because of the stories that her father told her and her sisters, and um, a lot of the things that you were saying kind of played out, Jeff. This kind of codependent relationship, and she was picturing herself in these scenarios, and really was really in her case, I guess, too young to be hearing these things, but at the same time, it's it's one of those things where just like the trauma and like abuse that all the indigenous people suffered at residential schools, it's hard to hear about, but at a certain point kids do need to hear the hard truth. So it's kind of a delicate balance, I feel like.
In one case, a kid is hearing something from their parents. In another case, as you mentioned just now, they're experiencing they're experiencing it themselves and could ultimately be turned against their parents.
True. That's true.
Yeah. That's a really, really good point. I hadn't thought of the codependent aspect, so that's a really great thing to bring to the forefront.
Yeah, and I feel like it's always a hard line though, in terms of when is it too young to talk to kids about this stuff,
Mhm.
or even even the other side too is that some of these things are very difficult to share. And I feel like that whether it's like, see, the thing is whether there's a side to, yes, it's important for kids to learn about this stuff, and or some of these stories being very difficult to share in that regard, by parents or other people or others around them. I kind of understand, like, I understand both sides of it, because because of the reason I could understand why one would may not want to, right? Or even
Mm.
even though, like, no matter how important something is, right? That's sort of where I can right, like, I can sort of see, I see both sides of the coin here.
Hmm.
That's really the thing. There's no manual on how to parent, and there's no like recipe on how much to add here, how many detail, what to avoid here, or if you're dealing with sensitive tastes, then avoid these ingredients here, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it does come down to personality. There are some kids who grow up with fathers, with mothers or fathers who either were victims of war or who served in war, and they just will not talk about it. And sometimes, sometimes it's something as simple as a kid is, as the child is inquisitive and wants to know, and the father will just not talk about it. I'm saying father presumptuously, but there are also other times where, a war survivor is keeping the stuff bottled up, and as much as they're trying to keep their composure and live their daily lives and build a life outside of war times, it might show up. They might get very temperamental. They might experience some form of PTSD. They might become very aloof, and especially then, and still now, like, if you're not equipped to deal with that, or if you don't realize what's available to you, how it might be of value to you, and what effect it has on your children, it's all a big mystery
Hmm.
of life.
It is, and I always feel too that it takes an, like, for certain things it takes an experience to happen as well. Like, as far as, it's easy on the outside to go, for someone to go, well, you should talk to your kids about this stuff. It's important for but but it's important to also recognize, see, kind of off of your point there, Jeff, that of people of it takes one person, it takes an experience for something, right? For a reason for not wanting to, like, discuss it, right? Because as soon as something comes up, it it creates that whole sort of, it creates that whole piece, as you were mentioning there, that when it's brought up, it causes a lot of, unnecessary grief.
That's another great word too, is grief.
Hmm.
Unnecessary, but also in some cases, like as you were saying, Jeff, like if they sort of just become very aloof, or if they just sort of shut down in a way and can't, like, aren't able to sort of discuss it, like it might be unavoidable.
Well, yeah, like, that's it, right? I don't mean unnecessary loosely.
Yeah, no, I understood. Like, and that is part of it, of course, because some of it can be avoided and so, or mitigated in some way, but no, a lot of it is, and that's sort of where you get the, generational trauma aspect of it.
Yeah, I like it's different. Like yeah, I think it's a very sort of interesting sort of cycle. Lynette and Sienna, what are your thoughts on this? Starting with, I'll start with Sienna. I'll start with you on this.
Yeah. um, it my apologies. It cut out a little bit. It cut out the sound. Cut out a
No,
little
no
bit.
problem. So just kind of continue. Just kind of pick it up from what
We'll
you heard.
we'll
Okay.
we'll pick it up. I'll hand it over to Lynette, and then I'll chime in.
All right, Lynette, go ahead.
Okay, so here are my thoughts. You know, expectations of kids and parents have really changed a lot in, say, like the last 40 years. I'm like an older millennial, right? I was born in 81. And so when I was growing up, you went outside to play. I think we had a Nintendo at some point, but we didn't have TVs in every room in the house. And, I didn't get a cell phone until after I graduated high school and all that kind of stuff, right? So, and, like someone was mentioning with the food, right? Like you had one meal was served whatever time of day it was, and that's what you ate, and you were expected to, clean your plate, because to leave food was impolite, even if you didn't like what you were eating. Um, and sometimes, now I didn't experience this. My parents are Canadian, my grandparents are Canadian, but you know it's I know people who have had parents go through things, whether it's growing up in a home where there was alcoholism or abuse or something like that, and they would talk about that, to their kids, right? Because maybe they didn't have anybody else. um but like, I feel like what kids were expected to I guess to deal with is a lot different. Like now and I say this having a kid of my own, like we kind of coddle them, right? Like, oh, don't do that in front of your kid, or oh, don't talk about that in front of your kid. They're too young for that, or oh, you can't leave them home alone until they're like a certain age. You know what I mean? So it's just, I think back then, I think, like in the 50s and 60s when Getty was growing up, what you could say around your kids was, it wasn't so censored. Like everybody has an opinion these days, and because you have the internet and things like that, right? I mean, everybody can put their opinion out there, and everybody has an opinion about how people should raise their children, and what they should and shouldn't do, and what they should and shouldn't say, and how they should and shouldn't behave. And kids are expected to be sheltered from a lot of hardships in the world, which, I mean, is just not, it just can't happen sometimes. Sometimes they do need to hear hard truths, and they do need to learn hard lessons, and that is what it is. But I think that was kind of my interpretation of like what he meant by saying, like, now, it wouldn't be appropriate. Just because, like, yeah, in today's culture, if that were me, for example, and my he's 16 now, and if it was me that went through something like that, and we were in like today's, growing up today as he is, and I was the one to tell him about all my experiences, being a Holocaust survivor, that, like, people would say, oh, well, you have like a mental illness and it needs to be treated, which may or may not be the case, but it's not appropriate to talk to your kid about that. Like, you basically don't burden them with your problems and your experiences.
Yeah, I can agree with that too. Like, I think, like, I mean, sure, it's changed, and I think along with things that with what has changed, I think expectations as well of what we expect, of what the expectations have changed too.
Yeah, exactly. The expectations have changed. I just I feel like they are exposed to things like, I guess, a lot later in life. Like, it's, for example, I'll just use something that's really simple, and it's not even like related to the Holocaust or anything
No,
like
go
that, but
ahead.
like, you know, back, like, say, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 years ago, when kids were growing up, it was really common for kids to have a paper route when, they're like 12, maybe 12, 13, 14 years
Right.
old. And like, that was a great job because you had to do it no matter what. If it was raining or snowing outside, too bad. You had to get up and you had to deliver that paper no matter what. There was no excuse. And if you were really sick and you couldn't do it, you have to find someone to do it for you, right? Now, I mean, of course, news, like print news media, is kind of on the decline because we can get it all online.
Yep.
I don't feel like there's anything that has taken its place to teach young children that kind of work ethic.
The other extreme might be that
Yeah.
someone who might have done a newspaper route at that age is now being told, like, either they don't work, or now they're working at a job that has, like, well, I mean, that's not really legit, because I was going to say they might work at, like a department store or something, but they have a lot more. So I don't know. It seems like there's a bit of extreme on both sides, and but at the same time,
Yeah.
how many people got jobs outside of school as well?
Yeah.
I remember being in high school, and especially my first, as a freshman, and there were kids that had jobs once they got home from work. Once they got home from school, they had jobs from, let's say 4 till 10. And part of me was
Mm-hmm.
like, it takes me that amount of time to finish my homework.
Yeah.
How can I, how do people balance a job and school as well?
I couldn't do it.
They may
But
not have had a choice.
pardon me.
I said they may not have had a
No,
choice. It could
that's
have
it
been
too.
like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yep.
it could have
That's
been
it.
like a
No,
single
Yeah.
that's
parent
it. Yeah.
family, and you're told, okay, you're 15 or whatever now, so you need to contribute to the household.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
you go to school because that's also your job, but you also, you go to work, you earn some money, and you contribute, to the household, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sienna,
And
sorry, I saw your hand go up. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to keep you waiting. Go ahead.
no, not at all. No worries. Yeah, it just cut out there for a bit. But going back to the whole question of like, was it responsible? I think like I get where you're coming from, like the sense that, um, you know, I don't know if it's a matter of responsibility or not, or irresponsibility, whether it's appropriate, but I think, um, like, say if you were like, I know that my grandma on my dad's side, would tell us, you know, stories about the war. Actually, both my grandmas did. One of them was a teenager, and one of them was really young, like, 7, 8 years old when it started in that. And it's like hard for, you know, kids to relate. Like it's hard for kids to relate in the sense that, they themselves have not um, been through it, which is really interesting, where Getty really puts himself in his mom and dad's shoes and really, um, you know, understands what they've gone through. And yeah, the expectations were totally different. Not only, when it came to, you ate the same meal that everybody else did, and that was definitely the case, with my grandparents growing up, and religion um, played a huge part of it, and you could really see that when Getty was talking about, how he, after his father died and after his father passed on, the whole thing with religion was really, um, hard for him. His uncles and his mom had that expectation. Um, they wanted him to really follow the faith and follow the religion, where he was starting to feel that, what, this is a bit much, and like some of the teachings are, you know, don't make sense, or what have you. So definitely the expectations were different at that time.
And I think I think there comes a point where it's like, okay, are we keeping up the religious tradition for the sake of keeping a tradition going, or in this case, police sirens are going off. In this case, religion just wasn't just wasn't fruitful for him. He was not he was not identifying or seeking connection with the higher power. And he had that year, the grieving year, where what, and almost what we'd call prolonged grief nowadays, but it's an entire year that's basically self-contained, even like no music and very essential bathing sort of thing. And it's you um say the prayers 3 times a day. I'm blanking on what it's called, but there are a lot of rituals um in some religions. And then he just afterwards just felt very alone, and he didn't have anything to turn to, for whatever relationship he had with his father. Now that his father was gone, he didn't have, as he put it, like a male father figure. And the uncles that he did have were really just, in his mind, like supporting cast. They were puppets for his mom, if you want, like.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that. Oh, sorry, Sienna.
Oh, no, no, no. Go ahead. Go ahead,
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's really interesting how for some people leaning into their religion is helpful in those situations, and for some just I don't want to call it necessarily a coping mechanism because that feels reductive, but it is interesting how that kind of manifested for like his parents and for him, and how sort of his feelings towards those other family members who kind of he felt were berating him in that time kind of after his father's passing.
Yeah. And Lily, did you have a thought on this before we wrap this up, or
Not really. I feel like we've covered a lot of good stuff and people have made a lot of good points. So I yeah, I agree. I think yeah, I agree that the religion, if you're identifying with it and you're actually keeping up the traditions for and you really identify with it is a good thing. But maybe if you don't, then the question is like why am I doing this? And maybe for some people it's yeah, some people it's a very helpful, but for others it might not be. Yeah.
On
He
top of rebellion, he's 14 years old.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
exactly.
And he
yeah,
does go on to say, like later in the book, that he kind of acknowledges that, like, oh, I felt this way about religion, and he kind of says, like, I like the Jewish culture, and I like,
yeah,
different,
that's right too.
yeah, different, but he said just like the religious aspect of it, no, but the different traditions and culture surrounding it, and being able to share that with people, that's what he enjoys, but not necessarily
Mm-hmm.
the strict, because they were like Orthodox Jewish too, right? Which is
Yeah.
like a stricter form of it. So the whole
Mm-hmm.
religion thing, it wasn't for him. But I think he does say in his book that he eventually makes peace with that and says, I don't have to be like a strict Orthodox Jewish person. Like I can do it on my own terms, and still be Jewish.
Yeah, and you know what? That's kind of how I feel too in terms of, my faith and that, and like I'm lucky to have that freedom to kind of choose. So in the sense of like, the prayers are something that I still keep up with, but there are still things that, I've kind of gotten away from, like going to church every Sunday, for example. And you know what? If you're able to make peace with that, um, then that's really, um, it's a good thing. It's a good feeling. And I remember also my grandma saying, and it goes back to how the expectations were then versus now. And I remember my grandma saying that, there were times that she didn't want to, you know, say the rosary, and her grandmother would be like, no, you have to say the rosary, well, at least once a day. And it's still stuck with her, but I don't say it every day, and that's okay. And just being at peace with it, and like knowing that, you know it's it's everybody has their own faith. Like, you can still be Catholic, or you can still be whatever. You can still follow whatever religion you follow, and not be at peace with your connection to it.
In addition to really establishing his own connection to Jewish culture, you could tell he's come full circle with this, because, and he's, he has, he is leading his full life now, because the flip side of that is, because of the anti-Semitism that he faced growing up, he really wanted to minimize his Jewish heritage. And he talks about going on stage one time, and I'm blanking on which band it was with, but maybe it was actually Kiss in the early days, but he started flaunting more of his out of his Jewish culture, where he's like, when I was a kid, he's like, I wanted everyone to be like, oh, that's Geddy, or that's Gershon, he's Jewish, but he's okay, he's not like other Jews. And he really wanted to sort of assimilate into a culture where he was accepted for being, on merit, so to speak. But the subtext of that was that being Jewish was not of merit. And he actually, in his own words, I wanted to be more than just the token Jew, now that I was in a place where I could take hold of my own identity and run with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, at the next, I'm curious to see what you guys think about that. What you guys kind of, for those of you that haven't gotten to the end yet, what you guys think of the ending of the book. Great discussion tonight. And Makara, where can people find us? Where can people find us? The show.
Yeah, so we've got the website, which is kind of the main place for all the updates and things. So feel free to subscribe there if you haven't. We've got the Discord. All of it is Books Panel, by the way. We've got the Discord where people can find updates, and we've got our recommendations and things. We've got the Goodreads, which is Books Panel, where we're putting all those recommendations kind of in one little place and putting what we're currently reading. Next up is Mark Carney, as we all are aware. We've also got the YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Audible, I believe, and Amazon Music, and Spotify.
And what's the website?
Bookspanel.ca.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. I want to thank you, Makara, for co-hosting here. I want to thank you as well tonight.
Always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure too. No problem. Always happy. And I want to thank I want to thank you, Jeff. I know Lily just popped out, but Lynette and Sienna, I want to thank each and every one of you for coming in here on tonight.
It's been an absolute pleasure seeing all of you, and I want to thank Ali and Makara and Jeff, Lily, and Lynette. It's always a pleasure to, connect with you guys and share our love of reading. And, this has been an absolute pleasure. I'm so glad that I was able to come in and learn from you guys and share with you guys, and looking forward to the next one. And I'm definitely on the Goodreads and Discord as well.
Can I point out how lucky you guys are to have gotten the domain bookspanel.ca?
Yeah.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
That is so valid. I didn't even think of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Score.
Right? Nobody else took it.
Nope.
That's really
Yeah, it's ours now.
Yeah. This was a fantastic conversation though, guys.
No, it was. Yeah, thank you so much as well, Lynette, for popping in tonight.
Thank you for having me. This was fun.
Thank you for recommending this book.
Oh,
and feel free.
You're very welcome. I have more like autobiography. I just have to dig them up.
Yeah. So anything. Yeah. So you. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, you put in the Jugmeet Singh one as well, which we will be doing as well. But feel free to put another one in for another recommendation as well. We'll get to it in the pile.
Sounds good.
Yeah, all the things. Fiction, nonfiction, whatever you want.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah. Could also be. I'm looking forward to starting in on some of the great courses. There's a couple that I have in mind that tickle my fancy.
Oh, that kind of stuff could be cool for groups as well. Oh, sorry, please go on.
Yeah, no worries. One in particular is the story of human language, and then by John McWhorter.
Yeah, he narrates it. If you
I think.
Yeah.
Are you guys, Lynette, are you guys Audible members?
Yeah, I am.
You bet.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know if I've read The Human Language by John McWhorter, but I have definitely read books by him. I know I have. And I have a couple on my list. That might be on there, but I know I've read a few by him. He's very interesting.
Mm-hmm. I've heard snippets, and I thought, you know what? Me being a bit of a language/linguistic nerd.
No, you're a language nerd.
I am a language nerd. So I thought, you know what, this would be a good read, and building a better vocabulary.
Yeah, I just finished that.
Yeah, and I thought that one, just by the title alone, I thought, you know what, that one would be a good one to read as well.
Kevin Flanagan.
Kevin Flanagan, yes. So I'm always finding myself at a shortage for words sometimes, and I'm having to think
oh, you will remember these, believe me.
Say and how I'm gonna phrase it, right? So
yeah.
And the ums and the uhs and
that's okay. He does some too, right? So
so
yes. So we will be back for Mark Carney's book, and Makara and I will be around as well So you get to hear us in a few days, don't you?
That is correct.
Exciting.
Yeah, very much looking forward to it.
Absolutely.
Looking forward to being able to tune in live.
Absolutely. Live's always the best.
Yes, and that's at aliandmakara.ca, correct?
Yeah, aliandmakarasbooks.ca.
Excellent.
You will be notified when the cloud recording is ready.